sure that's working. My computer has been a little slow, and I don't think it's just me. The chief said he was having some technical difficulties as well. So he's trying to come to the meeting, but that's working. And there it is. So we are live. Let me come back to where I can see you guys. And I will finally do roll call. Okay. Ken Whitco.
Present.
James Hairston. Sorry, I can't see. I don't have my double.
Present.
Thank you. Mark Pila.
Here.
Alan Hart.
Here.
Ray Dotson. All right, I didn't see him yet, but Mark Terry.
Here.
Todd Wolf.
Here.
Okay, Councilmember Mike Brandstetter.
Here.
Assistant Fire Chief Scott Adams.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. And as soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to click back and see if anybody is waiting for me to let them in. Sorry, I don't have my double screens. I'm actually doing this from home because I've been so sick. So I'm navigating on an itty bitty little screen. So I apologize. Nobody else is here. However, we do have a new member. We got 2 new members voted in Monday night. I have not had a chance to send them the packet because I've been out sick all week. But apparently Karen, and I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, Ferreira, knows Alan Hart. So he was able to forward it to her. So she is here tonight. And then we do have our guest speaker here, Tiffany Spear, who will be up once we get to that presentation. So I think that's everything unless I forgot somebody.
No, thank you, Joanna, and welcome, Karen. Appreciate you joining us this evening and being a part of the PSAC board. So, are you there, Karen?
I thought I saw her check in, but I think she's gone.
She's here. I see her. Anyway, her square is there with her name on it. I don't know if she's here. So kind of reminds me, sometimes we get distracted. I'm doing quite a bit of teaching and online. Some of my students are get a little bit distracted, and I might be talking for a while before they figure out that, or I might be talking to them before I figure out they're not listening. So
in your case, Ken, that's called us being asleep.
Some of them have said they're making their eggs or whatever. It's like, well, how awesome is that to go to class and make your eggs and, anyway. So again, thanks for being here tonight, everybody. So I want to just make sure that we did roll call, and I hope everybody had a chance to review the minutes. And I'm going to entertain a motion. Actually, entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So
Move the minutes as presented.
second.
Okay, it's been Mark was the first, and I think Alan was seconded. Joanna, is there any discussion?
I think my only comment I wasn't able to log in time for roll call.
Oh, it's too bad. You're out.
And it shows that I'm absent.
Oh, that was last meeting.
I think that's right.
It doesn't say you were absent.
Oh no, I guess I'm in the packet further back than that. Never mind.
Okay. I think you're good.
Okay.
So the only question I have would probably be for Joanna is that because we had agreed to do the August 4th PSAC meeting in person and then changed it, do we need to reference that in the minutes at all?
Honestly, I don't know, but since you asked, I will make sure I add that.
Okay. So I think if we make that change, then can we approve the minutes the way with that change? Just for giggles. Okay. Everybody in favor, say aye or show a thumbs up or something.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. We'll pass those minutes. Moving on to public comments. Did we have any public comments? I don't think we did.
I had none sent to me from
Okay.
Brianna nor through my email.
Okay, thank you. And then next is the presentation by Tiffany. And this was a request by the council for us to give Tiffany some airtime. So Tiffany, we appreciate you joining us tonight, and go ahead and with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Joanna, if you don't mind, could you please promote Ted Thielen, who's an attendee right now, to be a panelist? He is the ARPA intern with the city.
That's funny. I was actually messaging Mike to know if he knew who it was. So let me promote him right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everything's going slow. So I've done it. We'll see if it kicks over.
No worries. And thank you all. I appreciate the time this evening on the PSAC's agenda. As you may be aware, the federal government enacted the American Rescue Plan Act back in March. And since then, the City Council has asked that the city engage in a community engagement effort to seek feedback from subject matter experts, from members of nonprofits, other organizations that work in the community, residents and businesses, about how anybody and everybody thinks the American Rescue Plan Act money coming to the city of Lakewood should be allocated. Long story short, there's 4 general categories in which the money can be spent. And so what we're here tonight for you all to do, please, is either live off the cuff or after the fact, provide any feedback you have, either as a representative of a group that you may be part of as part of PSAC, or just as your individual opinion. We're taking everything and gathering that up. And then just so you're aware, in the second half of August, we will be coming back to the City Council with the information we've gathered and providing information for them to then decide how they want to allocate the funds. So what I'm going to do now is start sharing my screen and walk through this presentation. And at any time, if there's a question, please let me know. Once I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see hands raised or anything. So either Mr. Chair, you can watch for that, or if people just want to say, hey, wait a minute and ask a question, that's fine as well for me. So again, what we're here to do is to seek your feedback. And if that takes more than just right now, if you'd like to think about it a little bit, maybe review this and some other information about ARPA before you provide an answer, that's perfectly fine. But we're trying to get information from the community about how the city should allocate the funds it is receiving through the American Rescue Plan Act. So what is that? What is ARPA? This is kind of the second step by the federal government to react to and help the country recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, there was the coronavirus relief funds provided to the city per the CARES Act. And this is now the ARPA that this new Congress has passed and the president has signed. The purpose is to help health emergency needs, to replace lost revenue to local governments, to help with economic stabilization for households and businesses, and to also help with public health and economic challenges that have caused an equal impact of pandemic to certain demographic groups, certain geographies, including some areas of the city of Lakewood that I'll go over in a moment. So within ARPA, there is what's called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. Long name, long story short, it's to local governments in order to help with needs for households, small businesses, industries, essential workers, and those communities, quote, hardest hit by the crisis. And also to be available to make investments in infrastructure, including water, sewer, and broadband, to help again with those communities hardest hit in particular. And then within these categories, local governments have a lot of discretion as to how they're going to spend the funds. So that's partly why we're here to collect information or feedback from you. The amount of money that came to Washington State was almost $4.5 billion with a B. Pierce County received almost 176 million, and the city of Lakewood is receiving almost 14 million. That will be divided in half, as will the amounts to the other governments. So first half, about 6.9 million, and next year another 6.9 million will be available to the city of Lakewood to use. The funds under the rules of the game have to be committed, meaning the city has to identify how it's going to spend the dollars no later than the end of 2024, which is a long time from now, but that is the deadline in the act. And then the monies have to be completely spent by the end of 2026. So that actually gives the city about 4.5 years to spend the funds. They may well be spent faster than that, but that's, again, the deadline within the act. Back in March, the city council held a retreat where they talked about ARPA, and they came up with 4 overarching either policies or positions that they wanted to hold. First of all, they were going to add 1% of the ARPA funds toward human services costs or needs. Secondly, identify one-time costs for ARPA, meaning a construction project or a particular expenditure that a program or an organization would need. However, there would be the potential to use these funds also as seed money for a pilot program or something like that. Third, that the idea here is, given the amount of money that Lakewood has been awarded, especially in relation to the amount at the county, state, and federal level, it's be strategic. It's fill in the gaps where other funding is not available for needs by for residents or for businesses. So figure out where dollars are already being allocated, and then figure out how Lakewood can be kind of crafty and, again, fill the gaps where money is not available otherwise. And then the fourth one is to engage in this community outreach effort. So that's why, once more, we're here tonight to speak with the PSAC. So at the federal level, there was money allocated for housing, homeowner assistance, renter assistance, and homelessness assistance. There was also unemployment, child tax credit, small business tax credit, capital investment program assistance, and the Paycheck Protection Program. So all of these are in place at the federal level. At the state level, for the first half of their amount of funding, the state legislature has allocated dollars so far like this. So again, rental assistance, foreclosure assistance, school and education costs, childcare grants and providers, unemployment and family leave, as well as some other grants are available. At the Pierce County level, once more, housing and homelessness is a top priority. In addition, funds for food banks and pantries. The Rollback Relief Grant Program is continued. Entrepreneurship and technical assistance grants are available, especially to Black, Indigenous, and people of color groups. A summer jobs program, a summer youth support program, and then assistance to the court system. There's also broadband services, the allocation of funds for the purchase of a hotel just on the outside of the city of Lakewood, actually, as an emergency shelter for homelessness. And the city of Lakewood, just so you're aware, is donating dollars toward this as well. And so this will be a collaborative effort between Tacoma, Lakewood, and Pierce County. And then there's several other costs or allocations, including support for small businesses. One of the things I've mentioned a couple times now is the hardest hit communities, and that is families, communities of color, demographics, where in the past, as well as during COVID, there has been social responses and severe health impacts, more so than in other areas or other types of communities. And so the ARPA has set aside some types of investments and called them automatically eligible, meaning there's less hoops to jump through to prove that it is an eligible cost for these hardest hit communities. And that can include community health workers, navigators, meaning those people that can help point individuals toward resources that are available, remediation of lead hazards, for housing in neighborhoods, assistance there, including vouchers or counseling, educational disparities. So maybe it's adding some dollars toward a high poverty school district, including Clover Park, tutoring programs or other social or emotional health needs, and also early childhood or healthy childhood environment for young children or child welfare involved families and foster youth. So within the city of Lakewood, where are these hardest hit communities? This, I don't think, will be a surprise to anyone. It includes Tillicum and Woodbrook. It includes Springbrook, Lakeview just to the north, and then to the far northeast of the city, parts of Monte Vista. The city is talking about collaborating with other jurisdictions and organizations. So far, there's been some dollars put toward the Clover Park High School's Youth Warriors of Change program. They're looking again at this purchase of the hotel I just mentioned. There's the possibility to collaborate with Pierce County and other cities to spend dollars as a group to just get more bang for the buck, essentially, with ARPA dollars. And then creating, again, more navigators. So where the City of Lakewood's council said, be strategic and fill in the gaps, maybe here it's helping people find where the dollars are available for their businesses or for their families or themselves at the county, state, or federal level. And then there is the possibility, and this most likely will happen, the City of Lakewood can allocate dollars to third-party groups, either nonprofits or other governmental units, the fire district, for instance, or nonprofits, to help people themselves. So we're kind of a pass-through, if you will, of ARPA funds. A number of things were identified by the City Council early on. I won't go into these in great detail, but I mentioned human services costs. A youth employment program was talked about, assisting with rental and mortgage and utility needs for residents in the city, promoting and helping businesses, let everyone know they're still around and ready for business, helping businesses and residents in multiple languages, looking at a veterans homeless resource center, maybe in collaboration with Pierce County or even other cities as well. Maintaining the existing affordable housing within the city. So whether it's Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together, South Sound, or other groups, helping seniors or low income grants expansion maybe that the city already does, but provide more of those. And then some city facility and operation improvements that would make it easier for people to access city services, multilingual things, more availability of live help by going through the website, for instance. So should City Hall ever have to shut down again for any reason, there's still the ability for the public to access services easily. Looking at security cameras, for instance, in high crime areas, Wi-Fi access throughout the city, and then health, safety, health issues at city parks. So for instance, providing water access for hand washing for, again, health reasons. I mentioned some of these already. I'm not going to repeat myself. So where we sit right now is we're headed back to the City Council with the information we've been gathering, not only from the boards and commissions of the city, but also the public, our stakeholder groups, our partners in the community, such as LASA, Greater Lakes Mental Health, Comprehensive Life Resources, other jurisdictions. We've been doing a lot of reaching out to people, and Ted, the person I mentioned earlier, is also engaged right now in talking to people as well. There's going to be a discussion on August 23rd at the City Council about all of that information. There will be a public hearing where people can react to ideas that are being considered by the City Council. And then September 20th is actually, that should be the 20th, sorry. The ARPA action is likely to happen by City Council if they're ready to do that. So now I'm going to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, if you'd like, or I can keep going. But the idea is to try to spark some thoughts from you, get some feedback either right now or later once you've had a chance to cogitate on this stuff again.
Thanks, Tiffany. Appreciate the presentation. I think really at this point, if there's any questions from the members, that might be a good place to start. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could get a copy of Tiffany's presentation.
Sure, I'm happy to forward it on to Joanne, and then she can forward it as appropriate.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I do have a couple questions. I think, Tiffany, are you able to articulate or define what is meant by hardest hit in these areas that you talked about? In other words, what has happened in those areas that hasn't happened in other parts of the city?
Hardest hit communities are going to be something that is beyond just the idea of what's happened in COVID. These are areas of the city that are low income. Maybe English isn't their first language. Their economic status is lower than other parts of the city. And the way it was identified to be Tillicum, Springbrook, Woodbrook, Lakeview, and Monte Vista is HUD, the Housing and Urban Development agency at the federal level has designated them as qualified census tracts to be considered a hardest hit community. So again, because of the demographics there, the population, the economic wherewithal within those areas, the population, language or other types of barriers, that's how they're designated.
Okay, and then in the ideas that you put forward, it said one council member, at least one council member. So that could be most or all or
Correct.
more than one.
Yes. What we did back in March is at that point, we had very little information yet about how this would actually be administered. So we were kind of throwing darts toward the board, and the city council had a list in front of them of suggestions from staff as to how maybe these dollars could be allocated. And we had members of the council one by one say, yes, I like this. Maybe this is where the money should be spent. And so many of what you saw, a majority did support them, but the list, in order to be comprehensive for you, includes things that at least one council member said was a good idea. So no guarantees that any of them will make it through the final hurdle, but as we gather information from all of the various boards and commissions, that'll boost the ideas that go back to the council.
Okay, I know at least for me, I'm going to need to digest this a little bit and then maybe
Sure.
we can, but if anybody else any members want to chime in and add their 2 cents, that's great. Go ahead, Mark.
I guess a question on the high crimes area and working in the security industry is, I guess you're talking about putting cameras in, and I guess who would monitor these cameras? Because first of all, I know security equipment's not cheap. Second of all, it has to be maintained. So I guess the question would be, are you just going to spend the money, put these cameras in place, and that's it? Or I guess that's one question I have. And then the other one would be is the economic disparity in the area throughout Lakewood. And my wife did some research on this when she was doing a graduate program is, for instance, Springbrook area, they refer to it as a food desert, basically. In other words, there's no proper store over there that the residents can go to get food other than these little fast food places, which generally have higher prices. Has anybody thought about taking some of the funds and insinuating or inviting Safeway or somebody to come along and put a place over there because the closest place I can honestly think of would be the Safeway over here in the town center area that these people have to go to get groceries. Sounds simple for you and I to get in a car and pop over there, but if they don't have a car and they have to walk there, it's a lot more difficult situation. So maybe they need to look at removing or I guess reducing some of these food deserts.
Yes, that is an issue that the city is aware of, and thank you for bringing it up. It'll be added to the list of potential ways that we could leverage ARPA dollars. And whether it is a permanent store being built or whether it's something like I don't want to call it a food truck, but a traveling farmer's market or a traveling way to access fresh food coming either from Safeway or somebody else is something that is a potential.
Well, I've seen down in Olympia, this has been quite some time, but I remember seeing or being in it, actually, it was called a food co-op. So. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we could provide transportation a couple of days a week from there to a grocery store so they could have easy transport to get there.
Thank you. Yes. All right, Mr. Chair, what I'm going to do then is forward the information on to Joanne so she can forward it to you. And if all of you wouldn't mind, where we sit time-wise is the City Council will be picking this up again August 23rd. So I'm asking that by August 15th, people be able to send me back any information. That would be fabulous. And so you'll get that in an email form here shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah,
Appreciate
Mr.
it.
Chair, I think this group has the advantage of a joint meeting with the council coming up inside that window of time, so that as you are thinking about it, having some face-to-face discussion with with the council at that time about some ideas that come up, particularly if some that are specifically public safety related. You'll have that chance as well on the 9th, I think.
Thank you, Councilmember
And
Branstad.
I guess I would just, in terms of thinking, keep in mind that spending that can and things that can happen out all the way out to 2026. So it doesn't necessarily have to be spend some money to get a short-term impact. It can be, invest in something that would have a long-term impact, but will take some time to put in place.
Thank you
All
for
right.
that. Appreciate that.
I will say thank you once more and get out of your way, Mr. Chair. Appreciate.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you. Somebody's phone is exciting. Okay, all right. I guess we'll move on to, let me just say this about this. Once we get this forwarded from Joanna, I think that it would be appropriate for each of you just to take a look and then send those remarks that you might have to Joanna that we can sort of decipher and, and use Councilmember Branstadter's idea to maybe even present them to the council as well as forward them on to Tiffany. So if you would do that, it'd be great. Okay, next on the agenda is City Council Liaison, Councilmember Mike Branstadter. By the way, congratulations on your advancement in the primary.
Thank you. I think the primary results were encouraging. So.
So go ahead, Mike, if you want to.
I guess that there are just a couple of things that I would point out to the committee that yesterday, the National Night Out in-person events throughout the city, not as many as we were used to in the 2018, 2019 timeframe, but actual in-person community events did take place. There were some in each of the police districts, and so so those sorts of community building things. I think there's definitely was an interest in doing them, and the ones that I got the opportunity to get by were well attended. On the public safety side, the city council did approve a request from the chief to purchase a 3D crime scene scanner to replace an older Model 1 that is no longer going to be supported by its manufacturer with technical support. So I think that's an advancement in technology that the department will have. The chief gave a presentation to the council and has been doing things, and I think is going to be speaking here about the fact that on July 25th, some state laws took effect that influence strategy and policy as relates to the police department and how that is going. And one of the uses of ARPA money that's being considered is to accelerate into this year the purchase of body cameras for our police officers. Right now it had been envisioned that it would be one more budget cycle down the road before we would do that, while we've been focusing on cameras in cars. But the ARPA dollars look like they will be an opportunity, along with some state dollars that were appropriated by the legislature, to be able to actually move, beginning to acquire those cameras in the the additional staffing needed to support that program for editing and maintaining it, looking at that moving forward. The only other thing is that I've gotten a lot of feedback from the Lakeview neighborhood that they seem to have an interest in trying to get their neighborhood association restarted, as they're starting to see that there are a lot of problems, and they're looking for a forum to both discuss them and also highlight them. So I'm hoping that will come to fruition. That's been one of the neighborhood associations that has been dormant for a number of years now. So that's all that I have for this evening.
Thank you, Councilmember Brandstetter. Any questions for the council member?
I have one for Mike. It's something that came up at the North Lakewood Neighborhoods meeting. Does the city have any idea or have a list of food banks and pantries that are operating within the city limits?
The city has a list of food banks, which are permanent structures that operate and are a bit more robust than pantries. And food banks take the form of being a permanent location that is open one or more times a week, where folks can come and are provided with groceries. They each have their different rules. Many of them have their source of food from the Emergency Food Network, that is a regional supplier to food banks does that. Pantries, and there is a growing effort to create pantries, and pantries are really unstaffed. They're similar to the little free libraries, but they usually are a location that has a group of individuals or an organization that is committed to keeping foodstuffs there so that someone can come by and pick them up when they need it. That they also allow people to bring in place food there. I'm aware of 6 or 7. The Rotary has been aggressively seeking and assisting groups to create them, and there is interest around the city in creating some more. That again, the important thing is that someone creates this with a plan as to how to sustain it, to be able to go on. But there's not that I'm aware of a central list that is available either online or from the city about exactly where they are. They tend to be localized in neighborhoods and announced locally to do that. For instance, there's one in Telecom, there is one planned in Woodbrook, there's one in Springbrook, there's one on 104th Street, there's one in Lakeview, but near Bridgeport. That there is one that's been established on Clover Park Technical College, just campus, that's focused on students being able to do it. And the group of Clover Park High School students that worked over the summer to come up with ideas about what they might do. One of their ideas that they're planning to work to bring to Clover Park High School is a combination community garden and then a public produce table somewhere in the central business district that folks can come by and pick up items that are prepared in the garden. But I think we don't have, again, for pantries, we don't really have a comprehensive list to refer folks to, in that they're 24-hour operations, and there's a bit of uncertainty about what's going to be there at any given time.
Could I get a list from the city of the fixed food banks then?
I can arrange to get one to you.
Okay. Yeah, maybe through Joanna. That'd be great. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the report. Any other questions, comments for Councilmember Brandstetter? Okay, moving on to Fire Department comments. Assistant Chief Scott Adams, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the time, and nice to see everybody. I did want to echo National Night Out was a lot of fun. It might not have been as robust, but we had a lot of crews that just have not been able to get out and engage the public the way that they used to. So they really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. Got to see a lot of kiddos too. Quite a bit's happened in the last month or so since we met. Our lobbies are back open for general business, blood pressure checks and things like that. If kids, need life jackets or bike helmets, you can get those at the fire stations now. We'll be having in-person meetings starting August 16th. We have our first commissioner meeting that will be in person on the 17th, but we'll be able to host meetings and utilize the meeting spaces the way that we used to prior to COVID. Keep our fingers crossed that it stays that way. This is the time of the year where we do an annual newsletter, and that will hit homes probably mid to late August. So that's coming up. Chief Sharp wanted to extend a thank you for being able to share the information about Squad 21 or that program specifically. The first quarter numbers, just in case anybody likes statistics, the squad ran the first 3 months of the year, ran 650 calls. 75% of those calls are EMS calls, so kind of more of that low acuity kind of falls, things that are not quite as emergent. Month of June, we had that heat wave that hit us at the end of June. If any of you kind of follow, some of the statistics that were pushed out through social media, our typical call volume on a normal weekend in June is about 40 to 50 calls per day. And that weekend, we were hitting over 100 calls per day. So it's just one of those things where we had, a few brush fires, a lot of people, heat-related incidents type thing, not hydrating very well. And so we had a lot of calls related to that. We also helped assist Lakewood PD and the City of Lakewood and Department of Emergency Management. You guys know that we had those cooling stations that were kind of nice. We didn't have lots and lots of people, but there were quite a handful that were able to utilize it, a little bit more on the homeless side, but some people that just couldn't keep themselves cool, and they were able to utilize those cooling stations that worked out real nice. Let's see, a few more statistics. 4th of July, we got through that, I'd say relatively unscathed, if you will. Again, if you like numbers, in 2020 versus this year, last year we did 216 calls from July 1st through the 5th, and this year we had a 40% increase. So we did close to 300 calls. And the 4th of July, last year we did 58 calls. This year we did 82. So another 40% increase in calls. As far as fireworks related incidents where somebody is injured or there's a grass fire that's confirmed. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, what is confirmed and what's not? So this is where we get an opportunity to investigate the fire and really determine, was it fireworks related? So this year we only had 5 in Lakewood. Last year we had 12. So, and I think messaging played a big part in this. Between LPD and the city and social media accounts that we all have, that worked really well, telling people, hey, it's dry, it's hot, be super careful this year. A few events that we have coming up in the next couple of months. We've got our 9/11 ceremony. That's on a Saturday, and that's in University Place at Reflection Park. And then we'll also be supporting the city. They'll be doing a ceremony as well on Friday, the 10th at 12:30 over there. And then in October, a little bit later in October, we have our Fall Safety Day where we give away free pumpkins to the kids. And then I know the city has an event too in early October there. And so we support that event as well. Any questions about anything? I know I kind of talk kind of fast a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, no questions. That's it. All right, thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. And next on the agenda, Chief Zorro. Take it away, Chief.
All right, good evening, everyone. Joanna, if I could have you, maybe I can do that already. Oh, I can. I'm sharing, going to give a share screen a try here. All right, so Ken, what are you seeing on your screen?
You have, well, we can see all of the other slides on the left side as well as the slide that you're showing. So
Okay.
you need to go into presentation mode if you don't want us to try to read that on the left. There you go.
There we go. Okay. I knew I'd get it. All right. So what I'm going to present for you today, it's quite a bit of information to go over, but I should be able to get through it relatively quick. What I wanted to do is touch on the second quarter report that I presented to council. This will be a little bit of an abbreviated version. That one ended up taking about an hour and a half, and I don't want to take up that much time tonight. But there is some good information that's I think worth sharing with the group. So the first thing to start off with is some of our stats and our crime stats that we keep quarterly and report on quarterly. Well, here we go, starting with total crime. So if you'll notice, the total crime stats are significantly down. This is the lowest quarter in about 10 years at least, since we've been tracking using the NIBRS or the IBR format. This is, again, just a significantly lower quarter than we've ever seen in a very long time. And this is total crime. So this is, we're talking about persons, property, society, and yeah, those three. Now, persons crimes were up slightly from the first quarter, still low when we look at it with a historical perspective, but it is up from the first quarter, and it's continuing a trend from the fourth quarter of rising. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what is contributing to that increase. And again, that is specifically just persons crimes. Property crimes are, again, down significantly. And some of you may have heard me say this over the years, but our total crime rate is driven by property crime rates, because just it's a volume thing. There's way more property crimes than there are persons crimes. So if you can drive down the property crimes numbers, it's going to drive down your total crime number. Some of this I am confident in saying is a result of underreporting. We do know that some retailers don't report thefts at their businesses, and there may be some citizens that aren't reporting thefts, but that's still a very significant decrease. The one area in property crimes we did see also that's significant, that is still high, but we did see a slight decrease, are auto thefts. And if you remember, when I talked about crimes from last year during COVID, auto thefts just skyrocketed, and they have yet to come down. It's because car thieves, when they're out, they steal. And right now we can't book them into jail because of COVID restrictions. And then society crimes, these are your vice crimes like drugs and prostitution. A lot of the reductions here you're seeing is based on the Blake decision that came out a few months ago, that and then the subsequent change to state law by our state legislature that made drug possession a gross misdemeanor, but even on the first 2 arrests, they have to be referred for treatment prior to going to jail. So there's obviously that is going to lead to a decrease in arrests for drug possession, which is reflected here. And then total accidents, a slight increase, but if you were to apply a trend line there, we're still on the good side of it. We're heading down, which I'm happy to see. For a long time, we were experiencing some very high collision rates, and some of the improvements to these collision rates I attribute to the city's dedication to improving our roadways through new streets and sidewalks and street lights. This slide shows the types of calls, and there's a specific reason I'm sharing this. This slide shows the types of calls that officers get dispatched to, and in each district, and what they on view or what they initiate themselves. If you look at the yellow blocks in each district, those are what they're dispatched to. And you'll look at the number, it's either the number 1 or number 2 call type in every district is welfare checks. And that can encompass, almost anything from we haven't heard from my grandmother in a couple days and we're worried about her, to there's somebody over there laying on the grass and they need to be checked on, things like that. So it covers a wide range of incident, but it's usually not associated with any criminal allegations. But that's the majority of what our officers are dispatched to. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we get into some of the legislative changes. And because it is the season, I thought I'd include at least one slide on fireworks to kind of piggyback on what Scott was saying. This, our calls for service for us, fireworks related calls for service, were the lowest that we've seen since before 2014. And I can tell you, I was actually out on Saturday the 3rd and Friday the 4th in the evening, and the overall calls for service seemed to be down as well. They were fairly tame nights by police standards. And no significant fireworks related incidents that I know of. Now, I talked about the persons crimes and the increase in persons crimes, and here's what accounts for that, and it's aggravated assaults. And these are assaults where either a weapon is used or somebody is seriously injured, but more often than not, they're classified as aggravated because a weapon was involved. And what we saw was a 78% increase from the first quarter to second quarter in aggravated assaults. And I looked at in the first quarter what weapons were used in those assaults and compared that to the second quarter. And we saw a corresponding increase of 78% in guns. And that can be, there doesn't necessarily mean there's a victim that was hit. That could be a drive-by shooting where nobody was hit, but officers show up and collect shell casings and document it just like it would be like somebody was hit. But it still counts as an aggravated assault. So the increase that we saw from in persons crimes overall, I think is directly corresponds to the increase we saw in gun crimes. And as we speak of gun crimes, there's one kind of interesting bit of information that came up a few weeks ago that I wanted to share, and it has to do with what I call firearm mobility. And you know, when officers collect shell casings from a scene, they get submitted into NIBIN, where the ballistic markings on the shell casing is entered into the computer system, and they're matched up against any other shell casings that are found and entered into the system. And we had one hit on a shell casing we submitted that came back to a firearm from which shell casings were submitted in 9 other different shootings. As you can see there, and I list the locations there: Everett, Gresham, Oregon, Tacoma, unincorporated Pierce County, Lakewood, and Renton. So all up and down the I-5 corridor were shootings, one of which was a homicide involving this one single firearm. I seriously doubt it's the same person involved in all of them. But what we see is a firearm that is likely being traded or sold or just passed around, and you know, accounts for shootings in this many different jurisdictions. Before I move on to the legislative updates, are there any questions about some of the crime stuff or the stats that I just put out? All right, we'll get on to the legislative updates. So these, as Councilmember Branstetter said, July 20, yes.
Where do these mailbox thievery, where does that fall in your crime stats?
That would be under property crimes.
Okay, because it just seems like a lot of those are not reported. Possibly. And I mean, there's cases where people wouldn't even know that their mail was stolen, but yeah, but if it is reported, that would go under property crimes. Okay, thanks.
Hey, Chief Ray Dotson here.
Yes.
Regarding that property crime reporting, and you noted it's almost certainly underreported. I was in a store when clearly a fairly significant shoplifting was taking place. They did everything but back a truck up. And I started to step forward, and then I said, okay, what have I seen on the news? All the laws have changed. Almost anything you do, including calling them a bad name, gets you in more trouble than them. And the stores pretty much are prohibited. So I suspect that's a significant block that they're already embarrassed that they can't do anything. They're probably not even peeping up a bit.
Well, even before the law changed, there was a lot of retail stores that were not calling in and reporting shoplifts or even confronting shoplifters. They would, rather than risk the confrontation and risk somebody getting hurt or bad publicity or lawsuits, they just write it off and chalk it up to the cost of doing business. So one of the things, like the incident you saw, you made a good decision there, by the way, but it's important to remember that, you know, the business has to want to be a victim. So it doesn't do you or anybody any good to step in and try to intervene, only to find out later that the store has a policy where they don't do anything.
Well, I agree. It's sad. By the way, that means we're all paying for it. So I didn't get to help pick what went in the basket. Thank you.
Yep.
If I may, since you did bring this up, the alarming trend, and I'm not sure if I'm safe to call it a trend, about smash and grab, where people just come flying into a place and grab everything or whatever, and then rush out. Is that actually a trend or a thing in Lakewood or Pierce County?
Yeah, and smash and grabs have been around for a long time. It's not, you know, I know that the Macy's at South Hill experiences them in their jewelry cases. We see them around here. But one of the things that kind of a shift in tactic is that they are so brazen and not concerned about being caught, is that they don't really, it's not really a grab and run anymore, or, you know, they go in and load up what they want and walk out. So there is smash and grabs are a thing. I wouldn't necessarily say there's a trend that they're on the increase. It's just wholesale theft.
Do you happen to know our traffic stops, have they increased?
I don't have the numbers, but they have decreased.
Interesting. It's just, my perception is that there just is a lot more speed violations now. Usually when there's no officer around, of course.
Right. Right. We do what we can, but, you know, our traffic stops have decreased. Some of that is staffing. Some of that is the environment, but we have, you know, our traffic unit's down to just 3 people and a sergeant. We had 7 retirements this summer, and I just found out about an 8th that's going to happen in the fall. So that's a big chunk of our personnel that are heading out the door. So staffing is definitely starting to impact productivity.
Mike?
Yes.
Todd Wolf here. If, as retail was touched on there a moment ago, as
Yes.
we've spent more and more money on surveillance and come up with license plates and good info, does it seem like any of that leads to, are we seeing stolen license plates, or does any of that lead to actual capture?
Oh, it absolutely does. Not every time, but no, every little bit helps. And, you know, having video of the actual theft and, you know, as much video evidence as possible is always helpful, and really accelerates the investigative process to help identify a suspect.
Is there any clearinghouse? I know it's not easy, but police blotter type information sometimes that can give someone an idea that progress has been made or investigation has happened?
Well, what we rely on is our investigators and detectives staying in contact with the victims. So if that's not happening, that would be something I will take up with our investigative units, just to remind them that you know, that contact is important, so you know what is happening.
That'd be great. I'm always involved, as you know, but
Yep.
I imagine shop owners that would become discouraged and not continue
Right.
to really thrive to get all that information. It's hours of data gathering for me sometimes.
Right. Right.
Great, thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to jump into some of the legislative updates, and there's quite a few, but I'm only going to highlight a couple of the more significant operational impacts for us. So we'll go ahead and get going here. One that I wanted to highlight was the Office of House Bill 1267 establishes the Office of Independent Investigations for investigating uses of deadly force. They are not an automatic. They don't come out every time. It's at their discretion as to when they come out. I'm not sure what the criteria is going to be or anything else, but because they do not have the sole responsibility for it, and we don't know when they will or won't come out, we still need to have our independent investigation team, which is PC Fit, and that's the county-wide team that we established over the last couple of years. A slight change to Brady and potential impeachment evidence. These are truthfulness and other potential impeachment issues that might affect an officer's credibility. The rules are that the prosecutor has to come up with guidelines on what that evidence actually is. And I kind of welcome it so that we do have clear guidelines and it's not just left to us to try and guess. Data collection, you'll see a lot more data coming out of the state now. There never has been a central point, a collection point for any use of force data from law enforcement. So that's what this will establish. And we'll report all of our uses of force there, and the officer's name and the suspect's name will be redacted. So the reports that come out should just be about the use of force itself. Recording of interrogations, we're going to be required to electronically record any custodial interrogation. That means somebody's in custody or not free to leave, of all juveniles and any adult felony suspects. There are some exceptions that are listed there, but you have to give those exceptions or document those exceptions or whichever one applied in your report, preferably in a recording. Juvenile access to attorneys. So now anytime we, and this goes into effect in January, anytime we have a juvenile that is not free to leave and we have to interrogate them about or talk to them about a specific crime that we think they're involved in, that's called interrogation, and Miranda would apply. We have to put them in touch with an attorney. That goes for like consent to search a bag as well, or anything like that, or a car. They cannot, the interesting part of this is they cannot waive this requirement, neither can their parent. So if we have somebody in custody and they say, look, I'll talk to you, I don't want to talk to a lawyer, or their parent is saying, no, you will talk to them, you don't need a lawyer, that doesn't matter. They cannot waive this, so we will have to put them in touch with an attorney. And the Department of Assigned Counsel is coming out with sort of a resource list for us, so officers know who to call or have somebody to call when these situations come up. The duty to intervene, it's effective, went into effect July 25th. So a duty to intervene on excessive force and a duty to report wrongdoing. So the kind of the interesting parts of this are that it talks about, it defines excessive force as force that exceeds the force permitted by law or policy of the witnessing officer's agency. And the same thing with wrongdoing. It defines what wrongdoing is and says that it's part of that definition is that it's conduct that is contrary to the policies of the witnessing officer's agency. So if we have a situation where another jurisdiction comes in to assist on a mutual aid request, and our policies differ on practice or procedure, they would be required, if it's not minor or technical or de minimis is what the term they use, or technical in nature, they would have to report that to their supervisor, regardless of the fact that it's within policy of the agency who's the officer that's committing the conduct belongs to. So before we get into the next part, there's two things that I think have gotten lost in some of the discussions we've seen on the news about the changes to the law. There's two key definitions that you need to understand. It's reasonable suspicion and probable cause, and they are both legal thresholds for officers to physically detain somebody. Reasonable threshold, as you see, and these are, came out of case law. This one did, Terry versus Ohio in 1968. So it's been around for over 50 years. That's if the officer has, based upon their training experience, belief that criminal activity has happened, is happening, or about to happen, and the detention of that person is based on the officer's reasonable belief that the person being stopped may be involved in that particular crime. So whether it's proximity to the crime, what they're wearing, something about that person leads a reasonable officer to believe that they are involved in the crime. Probable cause, or that you have enough facts and circumstances that to believe that a specific crime has occurred, and that suspect is the person responsible, and that's the threshold for physical arrest. So it's important to understand those two, because they're critical to understanding the changes that the laws created and how we do things. Reasonable, and I've described it this way: reasonable suspicion is discovered, probable cause is developed. Probable cause takes time to, because it's the result of conducting an investigation. Reasonable suspicion usually just falls in the officer's lap.
Chief, if somebody refuses to cooperate at a Terry stop, is this commonly called a Terry stop? If someone refuses to cooperate, can they be put under arrest, or can they just dismiss?
No, if they refuse, so that under the old law, if somebody met the criteria for reasonable suspicion, the officer could detain them against their will. Now, if an officer, because the criteria for use of force is, it's kind of a little bit out of order in this context, but the criteria for use of force is that officers can only use force when there's probable cause for that a crime has occurred, or there's there's probable cause for that person, for the arrest of that person, or that person poses an imminent threat to themselves, the officer, or somebody else. So because that's the only time you can use force is when there's probable cause for those others, not reasonable suspicion. If you go to stop somebody based on reasonable suspicion, you say, hey, I need you to stop. And they say, no, I'm not, I'm leaving. And they just keep going. You cannot physically stop them, because that would amount to a use of force. So you can no longer do that. So the tactics bill prohibits, this is the one that prohibits any chokeholds or vascular neck restraint. However, they are allowed, there is language in the use of force bill that allows them. And I'll show you that later. For the different types of gas, there's CS, CN, and OC. OC is pepper spray. CS and CN, I don't ask me what the initials are for, but it's just kind of a more powerful substance. Those can only be used in 3 circumstances: barricaded suspects, hostage situations, or riots. And in barricaded suspects or hostage situations, you need command approval for that. And in riots, you need the mayor's approval. And it says the top elected official in the jurisdiction. So for us, that would be the mayor. None of this change is other than the mayor part. These others aren't a change in practice for us. We currently, if we are going to use CS and CN in barricaded subjects or hostage situations, we get command approval for that. And OC or pepper spray is still specifically allowed. Nothing has changed about the use of that.
I would assume that OC is something the officers carry, but not the other.
Right. CS and CN is a specialty gas that is only carried by CRT or SRT and our civil disturbance team. So under the military equipment bill, there's a significant amount of controversy surrounding one part of it. And that has to do with less lethal launchers. So when I say here less lethal launchers are allowed, that is my interpretation as well as our legal advisor. And I also say that armored vehicles are allowed because initially they were included in the definition of military equipment. So if we had any vehicle that we put any sort of ballistic shielding on, it was considered an armored vehicle and would not be allowed. But they changed that language, so armored vehicles are allowed. And when you look at the definitions of military equipment, it is all about things that are used to kill your enemy combatant in war, like rocket launchers and grenade launchers and things like that. Where the controversy comes in is they say no firearms of 50 caliber or greater. There is however, and the reason that's controversial is our less lethal launchers, our beanbag round launchers, are technically greater than 50 caliber because that's the size of the barrel. However, I don't think beanbag rounds fit the overall definitions that you're looking at under military equipment. And when we get to the use of force bill, there's a requirement that we de-escalate or try to de-escalate when practicable. And part of de-escalation, they list using less lethal and define that as beanbag rounds. So I do think there is a contradiction between the two, or a conflict between the two bills. And so we considered what, the intent might have been under 1054 and under 1310, and also the consequence for violating either. And the consequence for violating House Bill 1054, that the military equipment is that you're potentially carrying a piece of equipment that it's not lethal, but that the department might get a civil sanction for carrying. Under the use of force bill, however, the consequence for not carrying less lethal is that you have to resort to deadly force sooner. And I don't think that, I think that is a much greater consequence. And therefore, I would consider House Bill 1310, the use of force bill, is trumping House Bill 1054. So that's a very quick down and dirty as to how we got to the determination that less lethal launchers are allowed. And then this is the bill that prohibits no-knock warrants and requires officers to be identifiable. We already are. This is no change for us. And no-knock warrants, I think we've done 1 in 10 years, something like that. We don't use them very often. I think this is a circumstance or a situation where people saw things going on in other parts of the country where they use no-knock warrants much more frequently than we do, and decided to ban them. But they are now prohibited. This also talks about shooting at moving vehicles. So unless there's the person inside poses a deadly threat other than the car itself, unless the officer has absolutely no other option, they're not allowed to shoot at the moving car. The one, and I put this note in here, and this is my own sort of food for thought for our officers, is just if you do find yourself in that situation, or as you're thinking about that in your head, think about what happens to, when you incapacitate the driver behind a moving vehicle. It doesn't necessarily stop the vehicle. So you have to think about what realistic impact that will have on stopping the deadly threat. This bill also talks about pursuits. And we can only pursue now when PC exists for a violent offense. And that, again, that's probable cause, a sex offense, or escape. And escape is defined, it's escape in the first degree for this. And that's pretty much somebody escaping from prison. And I'll talk about the violent offenses on the next slide, because they define specific violent offenses. And then they say reasonable suspicion that the driver is DUI. So here, they do specifically identify or call out reasonable suspicion, which tells me that there was a conversation at some point in our state legislature when they're writing these bills about the difference between probable cause and reasonable suspicion. So I don't think when we talk about the changes to use of force, I don't think they were unintended, and the consequences are what the legislature wanted. For the pursuits, they also say that you can pursue if it's necessary to identify the driver. Quite frankly, I don't know what this means. I think you can make that argument in any pursuit. So I told our officers to disregard that and I just told them that's not a factor for us. Or if the driver poses an imminent threat to the safety of others and they need a supervisor's authorization. So I mentioned that violent, you can only pursue if there's PC for violent offenses, was one of them. And here's the violent offenses that are included. It's Class A felonies, and then these others that are listed under included. Under not included, I think are the kind of the more notable things. If you look at the included offenses, those are kind of no-brainers. Those are very serious violent offenses that you would want to try and use every effort to capture that person. But what's not included are some also, I think, pretty serious offenses, and that's misdemeanor assault. That's DV or not. So they are not included in the list of offenses or violent crimes. Residential burglary. So if somebody breaks into your house and flees in a car and we find them, we can't pursue them. Theft of a firearm, assault in the third degree, which is assault of an officer. Any hate crimes, because that's a Class C felony, and then assault of a child in the 3rd degree. All very, I think, very serious crimes, but none of those are we able to pursue for. Okay, so getting into the use of force bill, this is 1310. The language covering use of deadly force is, I think, fairly reasonable. What they talk about, that we saw the term necessary is still in there, and when practicable, we'll use the least amount of force necessary. So there isn't absolute language about de-escalating before using deadly force, because when somebody's walking up and trying to kill you, you don't have time to de-escalate. You need to defend yourself. So that the deadly force language is, I think, fairly reasonable. And the second bullet, that's the language that I think allows for VNR and chokeholds, because it says if there's any use of force that's prohibited by law, you can use it in deadly force situations. So vascular neck restraints are prohibited by law, but so that means they would be allowed if you're faced with an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And then the general use of force provisions, this is the one that talks about you can use force when probable cause exists for arrest, or to protect against imminent threat of bodily injury to the officer, another person, or the person against whom the force is being used, and that's the suicidal person. And it says, when possible, officers will exhaust available and appropriate de-escalation tactics. And in that language, under the available and appropriate de-escalation tactics, is where it references less lethal and defines it as beanbags, and actually has some pretty strong language about having that available. They do define imminent. If you remember, it says the person has to pose an imminent threat to themselves or somebody else. They define it as having the present and apparent ability, opportunity, and intent to immediately cause death or serious bodily injury. So this isn't, I think they're going to be a threat to somebody if they get down the road. They are a threat right now to themselves or somebody else. Necessary, that is a legal term that's been in there in our RCW and is still there. We still have the totality of circumstances as judging the use of force. The change on that is the totality of the circumstances is going to include the actions of the person against whom the peace officer uses such force and the actions of the peace officer, which means the officer's de-escalation tactics are going to be, or their attempts are going to be included in the evaluation of the use of force. And one thing too, when we talk about a use of force, it's not just going hands-on or actually coming in contact with the person with a tool. Pointing a firearm at a person is also considered a use of force by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, here's one of the areas where this has gotten very tricky, and this is under some of the community caretaking stuff that we do, like juvenile runaways. The law does not differentiate between people with mental illness, juvenile runaways, or criminal suspects. These rules apply to all of them, or to everybody. So we cannot use any force to detain without probable cause or imminent threat on juvenile runaways. And this goes for walkways from the Child Protective Services. There's an office in town, the Child Study and Treatment Center, or any other DSHS facility. And this is in direct conflict with RCW that mandates that we take runaways into custody. However, if we go to take a runaway into custody and use physical force, or have to use physical force to do it, and that's any amount of force, and something goes wrong, or there's a medical issue or anything else, that officer could be criminally and civilly liable. So because of that, even though there's a conflict between these two, we are saying that the use of force bill trumps the mandate to take juveniles into custody. Now, that doesn't mean we don't try. We can go up and try and tell the juvenile that they need to go back, or verbally convince them to. We just aren't able to use force if they say no and take off running. And the same applies to involuntary commits for mental health reasons. We can have somebody that's suicidal and not an immediate threat to themselves, and we cannot use physical force to take them to the hospital. And again, when I say physical force, that's just picking them up against their will. Doesn't have to be punching. That doesn't have to be anything overtly violent. It's just simply using any force to move them against their will and overcome a physical resistance. So we are going to come across people that we find are gravely disabled, who are unable to care for themselves, but haven't broken any laws, and are not an immediate threat to themselves or anybody else, who previously we would have taken to a hospital for treatment. Now we are not going to be able to. Well, like I said, it doesn't mean we won't try, but we won't be able to physically pick them up and put them in an ambulance. So that's the brief description. And I've got some scenarios I'll run through fairly quickly because I don't want to take up a lot of your time. But these are very fairly common situations, or ones that our officers have responded to, that are affected by the new use of force law. Officers going to domestic hear the suspect over the air. As they get into the area, nobody's talked to the victim yet, but they see somebody matching the suspect's description. The officers can stop or get out, ask the person to stop and try to talk to them. But if the person doesn't comply and takes off running, they have to let the person go, because running after them and tackling them would be a use of force, and there's no probable cause. So yet, or they haven't had time to develop probable cause, so they would not be able to do that. So what they'll end up doing is letting that person go. There's a drive-by shooting where the vehicle description is an El Camino. Nobody's gotten to the scene yet, but as officers get in the area, they see an El Camino driving away from the scene, but not violating any traffic laws. And nobody's talked to the victim yet, so all they have is what the dispatch told them. They can legally try to stop the vehicle, but if the vehicle takes off, they cannot pursue, because no probable cause has been established yet for any of the violent crimes that were listed. You can still attempt a high-risk stop, a felony stop. And if they pull over, great, but if they take off, nothing you can do. And that was a suggestion there. This scenario, officers are dispatched to a report of a suspicious person throwing rocks at cars in traffic. Nobody's reported being a victim, and no one wants contact. When officers arrive, they see the person standing there. And it is okay to go up and engage the person in conversation. But if the person walks away or takes off running, they're not allowed to use any force to stop them, because there's no probable cause. So the suggestion I gave them, and this is something we will probably be doing more of, is just watching. If they're not committing the act that was reported to us, we will just leave without making contact. This is another one that's, kind of fairly common call type, but a commercial burglary alarm at 2 a.m, and they show up and nobody's been able to talk to the business owner yet. All they've heard from is the alarm company, but they find a door kicked open and somebody's inside and takes off running. They are not allowed to use any physical force to detain them, so they won't be running after them. The alarm company, much like in domestic violence cases where the dispatcher does not substitute for a victim, the alarm company doesn't substitute for a victim in these burglaries. So we would have to talk to the business owner. This is one where I think some people who weren't from around here might have thought I was making up some wild tale, but this one actually occurred. Officers are dispatched late at night to report of someone dragging a dark object behind their car and dumping it. When officers arrived, they found a deceased male suffering significant trauma. The witness who's there sees the truck driving by, says, "That's the truck that I saw dragging this thing." The officers in this case, did stop the vehicle. The person confessed to what was going on. He pulled over and confessed. There was no pursuit, no use of force necessary. But if that vehicle had taken off, they would not have been able to pursue it, because they did not have probable cause for the violent felony that was included in that list that I showed you earlier. And then finally, this is an example of a situation where officers might have to walk away from somebody in crisis or need of treatment. Somebody sitting in Fort Silicon Park, yelling at trees, hallucinating, clearly in need of mental health services. Everybody agrees he needs mental health services, but he hasn't committed a crime, and there's no demonstrated imminent harm, immediate harm to himself or anybody else. And he is absolutely not going to go to the hospital voluntarily. We would have to walk away from that because he doesn't meet the criteria as defined in the RCW for use of force. And there's nobody else that has that legal authority to voluntarily commit somebody other than law enforcement and designated crisis responders. And they are typically not going to use force. If they have to involuntarily commit somebody and force is needed, they would call us. But in those cases, we would respond and say, sorry, if they don't meet the criteria, we are not going to involuntarily commit them or against their will. So the final thoughts on this. So for our officers, one of the kind of the changes in mindset is getting to the scene of whatever's reported right away. Even if that means driving past the suspect, because we've always been trained, you get the description from the dispatcher, you're on the lookout for that person on the way to the crime scene. Now it doesn't really matter if you see that person or not. The priority has to be getting to the scene and establishing whether or not there's probable cause. And then the other officers coming in behind can try and, find that person, and if PC exists. And then, I do have a bullet up here that says err on the side of letting a suspect go. And that's in those gray areas or those scenarios that we weren't able to contemplate in training. And I say that the state made it clear that they would rather a criminal suspect go free than have us use even a minor amount of force. And I don't say that to be snide or sound like I'm critical of the state. That is the message that came from this legislation. And that's what, I want that's the guideline that officers need to have in mind when they're confronted with the situations that were not contemplated beforehand. And then finally, I'm almost done. And then finally, the last bullet I have there is officers, when it comes to use of force, they are not required or expected to be assaulted or injured or let somebody else be assaulted or injured prior to using force. If it's about to happen, you're able to defend yourself and defend somebody else. So I know that was a lot of information thrown at you very quickly, but there's just a lot that we're trying to digest too. So if there's any questions on anything I just threw at you, I'd be happy to answer it. Alan.
Yeah, Mike, going back to scenario number 6, suppose that person was sitting on my front lawn behaving bizarrely.
Mm-hmm. That would be trespass. So that there would be probable cause for trespassing there if we told him to leave and he didn't. Now that doesn't mean that person would necessarily go to jail. All that means is the probable cause threshold would have been met for us to be able to use force. And once the person was in custody, then we can decide, well, does this person go to the hospital or go to the jail?
Okay, so scenario 6 really applies to public property.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mike, in that scenario about the dragging of the dark object behind the truck where there was no probable cause, how would an officer get probable cause before making a judgment as to an arrest? And wouldn't, I don't know, I don't even know how to ask the question. If the person is watching the truck pulling this person's body, that no longer counts as probable cause is what I'm hearing.
Well, no, that would be probable cause. Let me back up real quick, because one thing dawned on me with Alan's question. Alan, the scenario number 6 would apply to public parks or that person's own residence. So if they're gravely disabled and in their own residence. So now, Ken, to your question, probable cause would exist for something, maybe. But like, as cold as it may sound, illegal dumping or something like that. But it's not one of the violent felonies that's listed. We would not have had probable cause for murder or manslaughter. That takes an investigation. And you have to, evaluate all the evidence, interview witnesses, and try and figure out what happened. And in that case, had that person fled under the new laws, we would have had to let him go and hope that the license plate we got from the truck would have been enough to be able to track him down later, if we develop probable cause for him.
Even though, would it be reasonable for someone to think that there's maybe something imminently, what was the term, that this person leaving the scene was a potential threat?
Well, you'd have to show that they were an immediate threat, like they're a threat to somebody else right now, and there's no indication that that person was a threat to anybody else.
All right, well, there you go then.
Any other questions?
I guess I have one.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, Chief, I was just thinking this to myself is, do you, I guess, foresee possibly the uptick of people and concealed carry permits, and then obviously where that could potentially lead, because the public may see this as a limitation or constraint upon the law enforcement. Also that, and then where armed security would have to fill in some of those gaps.
Well, as far as the concealed weapons permits, there's been gun sales have been on the increase for the past few years. And I think that the applications for concealed carry, I think, have gone up as well. That part, I'm just speaking anecdotally, but I think that's already happening and has been for the past few years. As far as armed security, or any private security, if there's somebody there that represents the victim, like in a business, in the case of the alarm, if there's somebody on site that represents the victim or the business owner, they could say, this person isn't supposed to be here, and help us establish probable cause, and that would be beneficial. But I don't know what other, there's a lot of situations where having private armed security wouldn't apply outside of a commercial or retail setting.
I have one other question. I'm sorry, you guys, it's gone kind of long, but it was really interesting. But I just want to make sure I understand that if a juvenile, in the juvenile scenario that you talked about early on, a parent cannot waive the rights. The state is saying that the parent has no rights, I guess. And when it comes to their child, if they say, look, I want the officer to check this bag or come into my house and check my child's room or whatever, the parents do not have rights over their kids at that point. I'm not sure how to articulate that. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. So it's all about what right to privacy do kids have in their own bedroom and their own things in their parents' house. And that's going to be tough for officers to figure out. I think depending on the seriousness of it, you're going to need to treat it like they do have the safe approach is to treat it like they do have a right to privacy, and the parents cannot waive that and either get a warrant or put the person in touch with an attorney and try and get a consent to search.
Mike, I wanted to just mention that I thought your article in Suburban Time was right on, and especially the night before that, I think, when Peel Up Police Department had to let a suspect go and couldn't let the dog loose on him. I thought that was a great follow-up on it. And my fear is that the general public is not going to understand these changes and then blame the police departments for not being active enough in these cases, and you guys are going to catch a lot of heat on it.
But that's my concern also, is how are we going to educate the general public to these new constraints?
Well, first, that was just a clarification on the incident Mark was talking about. That was the sheriff's department way out on Meridian, and wasn't able to track on a person fleeing on foot from a homicide. And as far as educating the general public, we're doing what we can. The article in the Sub-Times was part of my effort. This is part of my effort. The presentation at the council is part of my efforts. But here's the the reality of it is most people don't find themselves victims of crime and don't and if it doesn't directly affect somebody, they have a hard time getting really enthusiastic about getting involved or trying to make any changes or anything else. So we can try and educate all we want until it starts directly affecting people or affecting the lawmakers. I don't know that that many people really care, quite frankly.
Chief, I know you've only had a few months and maybe no data, but can you speculate about what percentage of, let's call it, the initial responses are different than they would have been before these laws were passed?
I don't really have much data. And remember too, we don't use force very often. I mean, even before this, we weren't using force all that often. So it's not something that, was occurring on a daily basis that suddenly is not going to happen anymore. So it's, I don't really have any hard data for you, Ray. I don't have any incidents I could point to because it did just go into effect July 25th. So even though the legislation was signed off on a couple months ago, it's only been in effect for about a week and a half. I mean, we did one incident that I will point to is the homicide we had in American Lake Park, where a trooper that helped flood the area to try and find the two suspects that fled, found them walking and luckily gained verbal compliance and they stuck around. But had they taken off running, he would not. There's nothing he could have done.
I was thinking about the wrong time frame. I know when it defined pulling a firearm as a use of force, that used to be in the right circumstance the way to stop action and sort things out.
And remember, it's not just drawing your firearm; it's pointing it at somebody. So our officers just need to be mindful of if they have to have their gun out at low ready, just because the threat of the situation that they're dealing with. That's not a use of force. It's when they point it at somebody that the Ninth Circuit said that is considered a use of force.
Thank you.
On another subject, what are you going to do about recruiting?
We're trying. I mean, we've got another test coming up here next in September that I think we've got about 50 applicants for. We just did a testing process a couple months ago where we had 30 applicants. So we're getting people in the door to take the test, and that's the first step. And honestly, the people that are applying now and under these circumstances are not going to know any different. So it's just going to be, as they start their career in this environment, it's just going to be what they know.
Are you considering laterals?
Oh, always.
Because you've lost a lot of experience.
We did. We've got, like I said, 8 retirements this summer, and that's a lot of experience going out the door. And it takes at least a year to get somebody, an entry level hired and out on the road. So
thank you, Chief.
We can expect you to be understaffed for a year then.
We're going to have staffing issues for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. We need to move on, folks. We have youth council comments, but I don't believe there's a youth council present. Am I correct?
That is correct. It's summertime, so they're out for summer.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Okay. Moving on to unfinished business. I think did Councilmember Brandstetter depart? It looks like he did. The first thing we're talking about is the Clover Creek Rail crossing, and what I note is that the that the councilmember Brandstetter mentioned that I guess the fix of it or whatever has been added to the project list for 22-23. Can anybody kind of confirm that or deny that or give any more details? Because that would be something that will go in our accomplishment list. Okay, maybe I can reach out to Mike and find out any more details if I need any more details from that. So. Okay, any other unfinished business that we need to discuss? Okay, new business is kind of going down the list. We had a noise complaint on Facebook, and I believe that was, I can't remember who forwarded that or talked about that, but someone want to comment about that, this particular issue?
That was Alan.
Alan.
Yeah, my only issue is that it's just one of the civility issues that like speeding and ignoring some of the traffic signals that seem to be on the increase. And on the neighborhood websites, there you see a lot more complaints about noise. And I didn't know if that was something we actually could do anything about.
I guess that would probably be a good question for Chief Zorro. Is there, and I might add to that, by the way, not only just the noise, but how about neighborhood speeding? So in my neighborhood particularly, seems like people are just driving crazy. But I don't know if that's just because my wife and I walk a lot and there's no sidewalks where we walk for the most part. So, but neighborhood speeding seems to be going crazy. And so is there anything we can do or suggest, Chief?
Well, for the speeding part, on My Lakewood 311, if you're seeing it consistently happen in a certain location, report it on My Lakewood 311 and it'll get sent to our traffic officers and they will add that to their emphasis rotation. As far as the noise from, and was it car mufflers, Alan? I'm sorry, I missed that first part.
I don't remember what the complaint was that I forwarded him, but yeah, on Nyanza, now that Gravelly Lake is being worked on, all the traffic comes onto onto Nyanza, and we have some motorcycle folks that at random times like to make sure the rest of the world knows that they're around. I think it's motorcycles, but there's 2 or 3 of the cars with trash can mufflers who do it also. I try to keep track of the times because I have the hope that if I can get a pattern, I could email traffic people and ask them to sit out there at the right time and catch them.
Well, the noise violations are tough to enforce because they're pretty subjective based on the code and the RCW. But if there is speeding going on at predictable times of day, again, through My Lakewood 311, if you submit that complaint, then they can add that to their emphasis rotation.
Yeah, the other thing is I'd like to borrow an officer because once in my life, I would like to drive through Lakewood and not be at the end of the line of traffic, be at the front, the fastest car of the line. It's just one of my fantasies.
Well, you've got nowhere to go. So what do you need to be in the front of the line for?
Touché.
Also, I think you already answered, Chief, but the complaint that it's in the agenda packet, the complaint that you forwarded, Alan, was a noise complaint in regards to car stereos, cars stopping, going through the neighborhood with their music blasting. And it was you forwarded a Facebook post. I think Chief already addressed that, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
Thank you. Yeah, that's another thing. They like to have these 1,000-watt stereos in their cars. And again, since it's much worse since Gravelly Lake is under construction. Thank you.
Ellen, if you had adequate hearing loss, that noise wouldn't bother you.
I do, but even with my hearing aids off, it does. Wakes me up.
Okay, thanks. The next item would be the Joint City Council PSAC meeting reminder and prep discussion. And I'm assuming this is the accomplishment list of which we could use some help with the presentation. So the three topics that I really have on here, and I'm not sure the first one is actually appropriate, but the final approval of the fireworks ordinance, that might have been last year, but it feels like it hasn't actually applied because it doesn't go in effect until next year. But I would like to know, I guess, Chief Zarro, if we've, a couple of those things that we were talking about was helping or coming up with ideas on how that could be, how the public could learn about this. And we got a couple ideas about putting out flyers at the stands and then information in the Connections magazine. And are you aware any of that happened?
The stands were a little reluctant to have our signs up, but we did get it out on social media and we did get it out in Lakewood Connections. And on our rounds, or my rounds anyways, on the 3rd, I stopped and talked to folks here and there and let them know what the changes to the laws were going to be next year. And I got a number of folks say they were aware of what the laws were going to be next year, and that's not what they are this year. So the word's getting out. People know what it's going to change to.
And the second topic I have on our accomplishments is the Clover Creek crossing, courtesy of James kind of pushing that one through. So I just need to know a little more detail as to what actually is transpiring. I don't know, James, do you know, or do you have any information about a description of the task or the list that's going to happen there?
I was looking for it, but I haven't seen anything. So I thought it would be under Public Works, but it doesn't appear to be there, or maybe it's in future planning. I haven't been able to locate a document that talks about that.
Would you mind researching that a little bit more and then, given?
I'll look.
I mean, you don't have to do it tonight, but just
No,
so
I
we can have
understand
those.
that. I'll look. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Then the other topic was the dashboard review, which I think we have. We have the note, and the council has asked us to present this to them. I'm not sure exactly. I guess maybe just to ask some questions about what was our thought processes into some of the questions. And then some of the stuff was answered by the city, and I forget the person's name that answered those questions. Did any of you have an opportunity to read through some of those explanations? And if you did, do you have any feedback? Is it possible, or is it okay, Joanna, if there's feedback due to the late, how we're getting late on here, if I get that feedback after the fact, you just send an email, or do we do it now?
Okay, sorry, that last question confused me. I want to clarify. So the email that hopefully everybody got, I believe it was sent, sorry, I think it was sent Monday, was sent by the assistant city manager, but the answers were provided by, I know Chief Zarro, and he can chime in with whoever else helped him. I think it was him and Dave Buer that provided all those answers in that email. So I did reach out to Brianna and tried to clarify what exactly it was that City Council was looking for. And she mentioned that perhaps she had misspoke about you guys needing to present it. I think that at the joint meeting, if they have further questions for you, I think that they're going to ask you about it there.
Okay.
But I think those answers right now is our understanding. And again, Chief can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. It's just kind of where it's at. And if they have more questions, they'll ask you on the 9th.
What time does that meeting start on the 9th?
Is that 7, Mike?
Correct. It's at 7, and Joanna's, I think, correct in her understanding is that
they have the answers to those questions, and you guys can discuss some of that. And if either of you have more questions, that can be hashed out that night.
Okay, is there any input right now from members about the answers or explanations? Okay, good. All right, well, if you do, please read through, if you haven't had a chance, please read through that and then send any information that you might have or questions. I think probably to Joanna, if that's okay. Okay, and is there any other accomplishments that we need to be aware of to present to the council? Anybody think of anything? We did,
I think it, COVID made it a tough year, and I think that the city council is going to be aware of that. And the three things that you guys have given me so far, I think are pretty big items, especially considering that this was all, through COVID.
okay, the next thing then is a new business. Other thing I want to discuss real quick is that the city, there was a question about whether or not we needed to expand the PSAC membership or committee, probably more appropriate. Is that a correct question, Joanna, that we need to be consider? Or, because
Okay,
I'm not
so-
aware what our list number requirement is or limit is.
Okay, so the what I have been told is that the size of PSAC and every committee is at the discretion of the city council. So the fact that they have had you at 7 for this long, it was by choice. It was by city council choice. That's the way they wanted it. So doing a whole lot of recruiting, there wasn't any point because they weren't going to increase your size. Very recently, in fact, I got notice of it like one day, and then the next day they already had a bunch of applications, and it was very, very quick. I did not realize how quickly they were going to look for 2 new members. We have one of those new members who was approved Monday night at city council, which is Karen. And again, Karen, if I'm saying your name wrong, please correct me. Karen Ferreira. Okay. And then Teresa King is our other one. I was, again, I'm going to blame the fact that I was sick. I apologize. I dropped the ball and I didn't get the invitation out to them because I didn't know that they were approved until Tuesday. So my apologies, but hopefully, thanks to Alan, Karen is here, and hopefully we can have Teresa here by October. But that is 100% at the discretion of city council. So unless they say open it, there's nothing else that we can do. You can ask them, but unless they say yes, we'll open it up again. Yeah, that's where we're at.
Okay, so we don't need any, by the way, welcome, Karen. I don't know if you got our welcome at the beginning there. We kind of welcomed you earlier, but anyway, so we don't need to do anything about expanding or not expanding. We just move on, and that's fine with me. I don't.
So based on that, we have 9, and did Joanna just say the target was 7?
No, they kept you guys at 7 for over a year, and I'm sure some of that was because of COVID. But we can have it's between 7 and 15 is what the code says. Now you're at 9. Hopefully, I'll get a little bit more warning next time when they open it, and I can let you guys know. So if you have people that you wanted to reach out to, you can. But yeah, and unless I do.
Yeah, I think that didn't you have someone, Mark, that was interested?
I did. I'm gonna have to reach out to her again.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then, so thank you for that. And then the PSAC presence at the 25th anniversary. Do we know a date when that is? It's in September, but I don't know the date.
25th.
It's 25th.
Okay. Sorry.
What time of day?
Hopefully Chief can answer that because I don't know.
I do not know either. Sorry. But that, we can push that out quickly tomorrow.
Okay. So I'll be quite frank, I haven't, and we've asked about this a couple times, where it's been brought up in the last couple of meetings, and there hasn't been a whole lot of enthusiasm for this particular, at least in my view. So I'm curious if there's members that would like to be involved and do something. I think I'm out of town. I think I'm not available that day, but anyway. Any other presents for the PSAC at this event? Ideas?
No, I'm wondering, is the 25th anniversary on the 25th, or did I just merge those two numbers? I can't say I have an independent confirmation of the day.
Yeah, it's funny because as I was writing it, I went, oh, huh, I see why they did that. I'm going to look it up really quick because I know it's on the website. But I do believe it is the 25th anniversary party on the 25th. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So let me look it up.
Well, to your question, I think if it's after 12 o'clock, I could be available. I'm busy in the morning.
I plan on being there for, I think it goes like from noon to 8 or something. But I'll be there for a time.
So the real question is, yeah, and I'm looking at the wrong month, so I think I actually will be there too at some point. I work, see, I don't know a day, but anyway, the question is whether or not we want to have an official presence. Isn't that the question?
Sorry, hold on. I'm getting a different date.
Okay.
So on the website, on the city website, it says that City of Lakewood's 25th anniversary celebration is September 18th from 2 to 8:30. And it's going to happen at the Colonial Plaza in downtown Lakewood.
18th.
So unless I'm, more sick brain than I realized, and I'm looking at the wrong thing, but I've got September 18th on the website.
Should have delayed it a week.
Let me show you guys really quick, just so you can see what I'm looking at.
Saturday the 18th.
Yes.
Right there. Can you guys see that?
Sure looks like the 18th to me.
Okay.
I'll vote on the 18th.
No, thank you.
I thought the 25th made more sense, but whatever. Maybe that's a Sunday. Maybe I should look at that.
Oh, the 25th is a Saturday too. That's what stalled it in my mind. 25th on the 25th. Did I get that? Did I stutter on that number?
So we're at the 18th. Anyway, so we got it on the 18th. That's fine. And I'm going to go back to the question a third time. So is there anybody, a membership that feels like we should have some kind of a presence and or would like to organize it? Because otherwise we need to move on and we don't, I guess we don't have to decide that right now. However, if we don't decide it right now, I doubt it's going to get decided before and in time enough to actually do something.
Well, yeah, because I will say you guys do not have another meeting between now and then.
Right.
Correct.
So I'm just throwing it out there.
Just throwing it out there, Joanna. Thank you. All right, you guys. I think that, we just don't have the enthusiasm for that at this point. So if it's okay, I'll just table that. Actually, not table it. Just move on past it, and hopefully we'll see all of you at the celebration anyway. Is that okay? We're on the same page. Okay, I guess we don't have to vote on that or anything. You just accept it. Okay, review of next meeting. October 6th is our next meeting. And on our list of that's actually a very important meeting. Not that they aren't all important, but that is also the elections and then our work plan meeting. So so I want you guys to be thinking about that. I'll just give you a preemptive thing that I do not plan to nominate or accept a nomination to be the president again. or the chair, sorry, not president. So someone else can take the mantle. There's been a lot of people been groomed, and so now I've done it for the last couple of years. So unless you pay me really well. Okay, I knew that'd get a chuckle. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there. So any other questions or comments about the next meeting?
Before we close, Joanna, could we get either a telephone number or a contact email or something for the neighborhood associations? Tomorrow night is the Telecom Woodbrook one, and James and I are supposed to be attending. I would suspect they're not going to hold it, but it'd be nice if we could get a hold of somebody and find out whether they are or aren't. And we don't have that on our list.
Right. That is a fabulous question. I will ask Brianna if she has that. Sorry, city clerk. Let me write that down. Number 4.
While she is writing that down, we aren't quite ready, Mark, to close yet. I was just in closing for that discussion on October's meeting because we still have reports from board members and staff. So anybody, can we move on, Joanna?
Yes, I got it. Sorry.
No worries. No, you don't. So community outreach reports, we have any?
A short one. I attended the North Lakewood. It was another Zoom meeting again. Not too much. They were going to talk about having a pantry, and they voted not to do that. And we had a report on what was going on with Pierce County Transit, and that was it. That was short.
Okay, thank you. I want to just back up. I'm sorry. The next meeting, October 6th, technically can be face-to-face, but I would sort of put a little bit of a break on that, or a little bit of hold, because we don't really know. And so just FYI. Okay. Alan, did you have something for community reports?
Yeah, Springbrook is running a open pantry, and they had a night out celebration. Other than that, it's pretty much steady on course for them.
Okay. Any other reports or discussions of public safety? Anybody else go to the National Night Out? Okay. Any pending policy or ordinance changes that anybody's aware of that we need to do? Perfect. Okay. Then with that, thank you all for being here tonight. And I know it was a little bit longer one, and but appreciate it. So if I could get a motion to adjourn.
And by a second, Ken, I just wanted to offer you.
We go to the order.
I wanted to offer you this shot of that shirt and logo that was created some years ago.
Okay.
The City of Lakewood Public Safety Advisory, and also there was a black hat
and the reason
a windbreaker. So if I can aim this right. Anyway, that was done on my first run through the committee, and one of the ways was to give you a visual indication that you actually weren't there bothering people. The city blessed that format and assumed that reasonable behavior would follow. Although the previous chief, Chief Zorro, wasn't sure you could get that out of me verbally, but those garments would give you a little more legitimacy in a growingly suspicious civilian population. You know, I don't know about you guys, but I got people in my pocket all the time wanting money, wanting to talk, something that I can't live without knowing that they got to tell me about. So if you have some sort of officialdom, you might at least get a sentence or two out, see if your marketing works. But I offer that since I did the background work on it. I would assume the same permissions may exist if people were interested.
So we need to add that to new business. at some point so that we can actually officially discuss whether, so is there a question involved or present in this, Ray? I like the shirts and everything, but what?
I thought I'd get some digitals and send those to Joanna, and you or whomever is the leader can decide, is there enough interest to even worry about it? The embroidery that did it is still in business, probably has the digitals of it. But I just offered out there because I know when I was going around trying to get people's interest to say, do you have anything you'd like to see go through the public safety en route to the council? Hopefully not all complaints, that there is some legitimate contact there.
So I would suggest we add that as new business in our next meeting, even though that's going to be kind of full with elections and planning the work plan. But is that fair?
Sure. I'll get the digitals to Joanna and she can put it in the packet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for pausing. That's good information right there. Okay. Anything else? We go to the order. Okay. Thank you. And we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Move we adjourn.
We got a Mark Terry motion to adjourn. We need a second.
Second.
And Ray Dotson is a second, Joanna, and we are adjourned. Thank you, folks. Have a good evening. And thanks, Karen, for joining us.
Night, everyone.
Bye-bye.